I can't believe this isn't the Onion. Boeing shareholders just voted to approve a nearly $33 million compensation for their CEO as the company faces investigations and possible prosecution from the federal government. On top of that, this compensation is for the CEO who's departing, and they voted to re-elect him to the company's board so that he will continue to sit on the board. And you would say, hey, that doesn't seem quite right, because in capitalism, the system that we all live under, when a company is failing and people make bad decisions that are not good for the market or for their micro market little segment of it, they get punished by shareholders and by market forces, right? Like if a stock were to tank 25% in a single year, there were to be 12 whistleblowers, 2 of which died of suicide, and federal investigations into the safety of your aircraft, along with thousands of deaths, you would say maybe the CEO isn't doing such a good job and maybe they wouldn't be rewarded for it. Well, this is where capitalism has spectacularly failed us, the opposite of the textbook way. Shareholders voted to give the CEO responsible for these problems roughly $33 million in compensation. And to be clear, this is the CEO that took over in 2020 and started cheapening everything and cutting corners in manufacturing, and is primarily to blame for the downfall to begin with. The CEO said the company is finishing a 90-day plan for fixing its manufacturing problems. No, if you have a 4-year decline in your products, you cannot fix it in 90 days. It's totally nonsense. But people, the shareholders, don't seem to notice or have cared. They voted to support him anyway. He is leaving. He is going to be replaced later. That's his sort of departing compensation. But it's not like he's fully leaving the company, because apparently the people are like, you know what? I want me some more of those federal investigations. Can you get me some more lawsuits? I want to see birds falling from the sky, because we got to get this guy back on the company board. They voted to keep him on the board. I don't even understand I'm literally ranting here, but it just seems insane to me. You would think the people who just lost God only knows how much money would want this turkey gone, but they seem to just love him. They don't seem to care about losing money, which is baffling, because that's just not how capitalism is supposed to work. Here's a wild story about a woman who got stuck in her Tesla for 40 minutes with 115 degrees heat inside the car because the vehicle was doing an update. In case you didn't know this, when Tesla is updating, much like your smartphone would these days, you actually cannot really do very much with the car. You can't start it, you can't run the AC, you can't run the air filtration, you can't roll down the windows, any of that kind of stuff. And on top of this, you're also not supposed to open the doors to get out, because you risk damaging the vehicle, because it also updates the electronic doors. Now, there are manual releases. Yes, there are definitely manual releases for the video, so you're not trapped, but it'll warn you not to do that. So this woman, I think it was Brianna Janelle, if I'm not mistaken, went to go get Chick-fil-A, started the update in her car thinking it would only take a few minutes, and instead of 24, it took 40 minutes sitting directly in the sun, so the heat continues to rise and rise and rise and rise and rise while she's stuck in there. Decided to TikTok about it, so she got herself an easy 30 million views. Man, I need to get stuck in a car someday. And eventually started to get very concerned. She got very sweaty, very hot. The internal temperature of the car peaked at 115 degrees, which is dog killing temperature. I don't know exactly how that compares to people killing temperature. And her advice is, do not update the car while you're sitting in it. Stick to updating at 2 a.m. I also agree with that. And electronic door releases are not exclusive to Tesla. So we've done a lot of negative anti-Tesla videos here on the channel for, I guess, covering technology. This is one I'm going to say I don't want to blame on the vehicle. As a Tesla owner myself, I know that the updates can take a long time. I know about not being able to get out of a car. I live in Texas. I most certainly would not park the car directly in the sunlight and then lock myself in there for an inordinate amount of time. And I guarantee you, well before the internal temperature hit 115 degrees, probably when it got about 95 to 100 degrees, is when I would have just gone ahead and done the manual door open, get out of the car, and worry about the damage later. So as much as it's fun to bag on Elon and Tesla, I think this is a lot more Brianna's problem than it was the car's problem. Here's a wild story from the land down under. Dr. Richard Scoiler is cancer-free 1 year after using his own revolutionary treatment for terminal brain cancer. This is actually a picture of his MRI. He had a massive brain tumor. It's very easy to see highlighted in red here. And here's Dr. Richard Scoiler now looking actually pretty happy and healthy, considering the fact that he's got a grapefruit lodged in the back of his head. What's insanely impressive about this story is you just can't keep a mad lad down. This is a professor who, along with his partner Georgina Long at Australia's Melanoma Institute Australia, has over the past decade been researching immunotherapy, trying to find the right combination of drugs to help the body's immune system attack cancer. And what him and his colleague eventually found is that the most effective type of immunotherapy is a combination pre-surgery immunotherapy. Basically, he got immunotherapy, then he got administered a vaccine personalized to his own DNA and his own tumor's characteristics to boost the cancer detecting powers of the drug. And he will later be going through surgery, which is insane. The idea is to shrink the tumor and put it into remission before it's even removed to make the job easier on the doctors and the recovery better. And this was completely experimental, at least in the country of Australia. And he says, I'm the best I've felt in yonks. Oh my God, it's very powerfully Australian. I feel like I'm watching Farscape again. As he says, it certainly doesn't mean that my brain cancer is cured, but it's just nice to know that it hasn't come back yet. So I've still got some more time to enjoy my life with my wife, Katie, and my 3 wonderful kids. Because the type of cancer he got usually kills people in less than a year. It has I think a 10% 1-year survival rate. But due to the treatment that he invented and used on himself, that survival rate has now gone up to 50% after a year. And I think after 18 months, he might qualify for a surgery to remove the grapefruit from his head, which I think is extremely impressive. It's almost like superhero or Marvel villain level stuff, but in real life. Like, it's like an experimental researcher has to use his own science to save his life and be reunited with his wife. Well, yeah, except you don't get cool superpowers from it. You just get to live, which is great. I think it's a really cool story. I've got one last brain science story for you in a week that's actually been filled with human brain information, and this comes out of Shanghai, China. A frozen human brain tissue can now be revived without damage thanks to a new technique invented at the University of Shanghai. Scientists have been successfully able to freeze and thaw human brain organoids and cubes of brain tissue samples from someone with epilepsy. This does not solve the cryogenic problem. You're not about to get in a freeze tube anytime soon, but what it does do is enable better research into neurological conditions and allow scientists to store brain samples for a very long period of time. So, as most of you probably know, brain tissue doesn't usually survive freezing and thawing because if you think of your cells as something more like water balloons filled with water and other things, when you freeze them, the water expands, it busts the cell membrane. Almost all the cells are destroyed, so it's kind of mushy when you unthaw it. So what the researchers wanted to do is try a wide variety of cocktails and compounds, of chemical compounds such as sugars and antifreezes and different suspensions that they think might help the brain cells survive the freezing process. And they decided to first test this out with organoids, which are stem cells that can be organized to grow in a specific way to sort of be analogous to an organ. And then they stored these in liquid nitrogen for at least 24 hours, then thawed them out and compared to the before sample to see how the neurites, or the branches of the nerve cells, held up and the overall cell health and death rate. So what they eventually landed on is a blend of chemical compounds called methylcellulose, ethylene glycol, DSMO, and Y27. The scientists just call it METI, so we're just going to call it METI. And the results were that the thawed organoids' appearance, growth, and function were highly similar to those of the organoids of the same age that had never been frozen. So that's not to say there's no damage, that's not to say it was perfect, but that's to say that there was very minimal damage and that the organoids took so little damage that they were at least still able to function, which is honestly a major breakthrough in cryogenics in general. So they decided to try this on a human being and took a 3 millimeter cubic sample of brain tissue from a 9-month-old girl with epilepsy, placed them in the Medi, then froze, and then thawed it, and the tissue maintained its pre-freezing structure and continued to remain active in a laboratory culture for at least 2 weeks after being thawed. So they were able to successfully freeze and thaw organoids and freeze and unthaw human brain tissue, albeit small little slivers of it, but it's still a massive step forward, not only for laboratory science and being able to research and store and transport and stuff with different samples, but also one tiny step forward toward cryogenics, so that maybe one day we will be able to step into a tube, freeze ourselves, and wake up in the year 2500 AD.